Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I'm sharing a recipe that is near and dear to my heart. This recipe for oatmeal bread was given to my family, I believe my grandma, before I was even born. It was from a dear elderly neighbor, and it has to be at least 60 years old. This bread is so delicious. It's sweet, rich, and it's just like the bread your grandma would make. I think you're going to love it as much as we do. We've been loving it and eating it for generations. And so today I'm going to show you step by step how to make it. One thing to keep in mind is that our neighbor's recipe made 2 loaves of bread. Today, as I go through and show you how to make this bread, I've cut it down to 1 loaf. So the measurements for either a single loaf or a double loaf will be in the description and also in the link on my blog. So you can check that out there as well. But I think if you try this bread, you'll find that it is so delicious. Let's get started baking. We'll start by making the oat mixture. Add 1 cup of quick cooking oats to a large mixing bowl and pour 1 cup of boiling water over them. Stir the oats to make sure they are all wet. Add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1 1/2 teaspoons of butter, and next you'll add 2 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons of molasses, or you can weigh out 56 grams. And you'll add 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt. I actually forgot to add my salt at this point, but it doesn't matter. You can mix all the ingredients together now or add the salt later. And here's that 1 1/2 teaspoon of salt that I remembered. You'll want to mix until everything is well combined and then let it cool to lukewarm so that you can add your yeast, which we're going to proof here in just a moment. While your oat mixture cools, you can proof your yeast by dissolving 1 1/8 teaspoon of yeast in 1/2 cup of warm water. Again, this should be between 90 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit for active dry yeast or 120 and 130 for rapid rise yeast. If you're using rapid rise yeast, proofing is optional and you can add both the warm water and the yeast directly to your bowl as long as your oatmeal mixture is not warmer than 130 degrees. But for active dry yeast, proofing is required, so you need to let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes or until it gets nice and foamy. Once your oat mixture is lukewarm, add the proofed yeast and mix it all together. Next, stir in about 1 1/2 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. It takes a little bit of elbow grease to get all the flour incorporated and form a very firm sponge. Just be patient because the flour will absorb and become very sticky. Once the flour is almost all incorporated, you'll cover the bowl with plastic wrap or a clean towel and let it sit for about 20 minutes. This rest period helps the flour to hydrate and it makes the dough so much easier to handle later on. After your sponge has rested, start kneading in more flour. If kneading by hand, I like to dump some flour into the bowl and work my ball around the dough so that it's really well coated, and then I'll turn the dough out onto my countertop. This dough requires quite a bit of kneading and time to work in the flour. If you're using a dough hook with your stand mixer, stay close by and just continue to add flour a tablespoon at a time, scraping the sides and checking to see if you have enough flour by gently poking the dough with your fingers. You have enough flour when the dough does not remain on your fingers when you poke it. Again, it's sticky, but it shouldn't remain to your fingers. The dough ends up feeling very firm, but you'll be surprised at how much it puffs up when it rises and bakes. You'll notice as I'm kneading that the dough will still kind of stick to my hands, but it's not actually staying on my hands. That's how you know you have enough flour in your dough. This is a very firm dough though, so if you have a comparison, if you've made my cinnamon rolls that I'll link here above, that dough is very soft. This one is very firm, so a completely different kind of dough since we're doing a loaf of bread. Once you're at this point and it's smooth, you're going to form the dough into a ball and place it into a lightly greased bowl. You'll turn it to coat it on all sides and then cover it with a towel or plastic wrap and let it rise in a warm spot for about an hour or until it doubles in size. I like to use my oven's bread proof feature for this step, so your rise time may vary depending on your home's temperature. To check if the dough has risen enough, just gently press your finger into the dough, and if the indentation does not spring back, your dough is ready to shape. Turn the dough out onto a clean counter and flatten it completely to remove any air bubbles. Pull and fold the top edge of the dough down. It's kind of a tugging motion to smooth out the dough, and then also pull and tug the sides in on themselves. Tug and turn the dough on itself, forming a tight roll. You'll want to press down lightly so that you can push out any trapped air that's in the dough. Place the loaf seam side down into a greased loaf pan that's 8.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Instead of cooking spray, I brush my pans with a homemade pan release, which is equal parts avocado oil, unbleached flour, and butter. It works incredibly well to prevent sticking. Make a quick egg wash of 1 egg and 1 tablespoon of water whisked together. Brush the wash on top of the dough and sprinkle some oats on top. This step is completely optional, but makes for such a pretty loaf, so I highly recommend you do this. Loosely cover the pan and let the dough rise again until it just domes over the edge of the pan. This second rise takes less time, and for me, it's about 30 minutes using my oven's bread proof feature. Just keep an eye on the spread so it doesn't overproof and deflate while it's baking. To check if your bread has risen enough, very gently poke the loaf with a wet finger. If the dough springs back slowly, it's ready to bake. Bake your loaf in a preheated oven, 325 degrees Fahrenheit for a glass pan or 350 degrees Fahrenheit for a metal one. This loaf takes about 60 to 70 minutes to bake, or until the internal temperature reaches around 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Let your hot loaf cool in the pan for about 5 minutes before you turn it out onto a wired rack. Let it rest for at least an hour so that the crumb can set and it won't be gummy when you cut it. I'm using my House bread slicer, which makes it so easy to get even, perfect slices every time. This bread is best enjoyed within the first few days while it's fresh and moist. It's perfect for toast, sandwiches, or just slathered with some butter or jam. Just look at that gorgeous crumb. It freezes beautifully too. Just place your sliced loaf into a freezer-safe bag. That way, you can grab a slice or two whenever you want, and it tastes just as good as the day you baked it. All right, guys, there we have it. Bread just like Grandma would have made. I think you're going to love this. If you make this, please let me know in the comments. I'd really appreciate to hear feedback on it and see if you love it as much as we do. And again, don't forget to check out the description if you want to find out how to make a double loaf or go to the full printable recipe on my website. Thank you guys so much for watching. You don't know how much it means to me. I really appreciate you guys. Take care and happy baking.